In 2025, I sold over $1 million worth of product on Amazon, and this is episode 6 of me scaling my business to $3 million in 2026. Now, before we go further, there's one thing I want to mention. If you want the same tracking sheet I'm using to scale from 1 to 3 million this year, you can grab it for free in the link in the description. In my most recent email I just sent out, I was actually talking about VAs and the exact SOP that I use and hire with till this day to find good prospects. So I guarantee that you're going to gain value from subscribing to the newsletter regardless of what you're looking for. There's always something for everybody. Okay, let's get into this week's numbers. So let's go ahead and take a look at our numbers for the first week of February here. So we can see that we purchased a total of 675 units with an ACOG of about $27.80, an ASP of right at $50, and then a total of 64 unique ASINs. Moving on to ROI and margin, we got a 29% ROI with a 16.38% margin. Estimated sales looking at about 34K almost with a spend of almost 19K. And then finally, our profits were about 5,500. So overall, this week was decently solid for margin, but I still felt like we underspent. As you can see, we only had a total of 18,000 in spend, but there is going to be a reason to justify that. And then just so you guys can see here as well, after net fees and overhead, we're looking at about almost $4,000 on a 11.85% projected margin for the first week of February. So now let's go ahead and head over into the February tracker, and I'm going to go ahead and break down some differences between last month and this month, different goals, and then also show you guys why I was only able to spend 18K as opposed to what we're trying to spend, which is about 25 to 30K a week. Okay, so now we are here in the actual projections Google Sheet, and this is the first difference I want to point out. So we can see here that before we had only January section, I just went ahead and added February. So these are all new metrics that were pulled from the last day of January to update things like ASP, ACOG, prep per unit, and any overhead. And we can see here that overhead increased slightly. This is for me now accounting for some VA commission. Prep per unit also increased slightly because I've been working with a new prep center, so their fees are a little bit more expensive than what I'm used to, but overall just had to make a slight adjustment. And we can see that ACOG and ASP is drastically different from the initial January thing that I had made. And the reason why is because I had pulled these January ASP and ACOG numbers from November, because December is kind of like an anomaly. So in November, our ASP and ACOG was like a 33 and 17. Well, right now we're looking at 51 and 28 ever since we bought all that product from January. So just trying to keep all these numbers updated from sort of previous months to give us good projections for, the next month following. We can see that we are targeting a lot less profit this month, and that's because there is 3 days less in February. And I do also think it's going to be a slower month in general. We can see that return rate is the same, sellable returns is the same, COG to rev ratio is going up, which isn't necessarily good because that means our margin's a little less, but it's 5%. And then prep to no prep drag, I still have to wait on my bookkeeper to give me the results from January, which even that isn't going to be very accurate when it comes to how much we paid in prep. Reason why is because a lot of that was carried over from either Q4 or we really ramped up spending in January. So once we have a consistent couple months of spend, we'll know exactly how much prep is taking off our margin, which is what this percentage here is. And now moving along to the actual spreadsheet with all the numbers and stuff, you guys can basically see all the same exact things from the doc, so I'm not going to go over them. But I do want to quickly touch on why I only spent 18K this week. And if you can't already tell, it's because we have a lot of product either awaiting shipment or on hold. Reason for this is my team just hasn't gotten around to doing so, as we've all been pretty busy this week. And I've just been tweaking some hours and things of that nature. And if we come over here to the holds area, which is where I store any products that are not yet shipped, if we total up the amount of spend, it comes out to roughly almost $10,000, which means that technically we did spend target this week of about 25K in spend. As you can see, I did actually adjust our spend, profit, and revenue goals. Again, reason for this is because I anticipate February is going to be a little bit slower and we have 3 days less in comparison to January. So I made sure to go ahead and update all these numbers. So with our spend goal being 108,000, we have to spend roughly 25K per week. And that's roughly because obviously there's $8,000 not accounted for that. But with 10K added to our total spend of 18K, we should be on target as long as all this stuff ships and nothing goes wrong. And then coming over to net projections, we can see that I spent a total of $723 on overhead this week. Again, this is accounting for the extra $200 that I increased in comparison to January. And you can see that our net profit and net margin is the same from what I put on the Google Doc. So with those numbers out of the way, we're going to go ahead and jump into Seller Board next, and I'll show you guys how this week went. All right, so over here on Seller Board now, we can see that my numbers have really started to shoot up over the last last week. This is just because inventory is on a very consistent flow. I'm spending money super consistently, and now we're really coming off of the Q4 madness. So we can see this week I was able to sell almost 50 grand worth of product with only 43 refunds and about $7,000 of gross profit. And this puts our refund percentage right at that 4% that I had estimated. So as we can see, everything is now back to normal and I'm no longer experiencing 6, 7, 8% worth of refunds. So let's go ahead and get our net margin for this week so you guys can see how much we made. Okay, so I've already went ahead and compiled how much I spent in prep for this week. Now I'm adding in the overhead costs. So for the first week of February, we made a net profit of about $4,600. Again, this is just based on projections for at least the fees and stuff like that. These are actual numbers though on Sellerboard, but the fees themselves, like prep per unit and then also overhead, is all just an estimate. Overhead is obviously fixed, but prep in and of itself is sort of dynamic just because you'll pay an invoice today and then that same invoice worth of inventory isn't going to sell till 2 to 4 weeks later. But we can see we're at 4,600. So now we're going to take this and divide it by our revenue to figure out our net margin for the week. All right. And then dividing this by the revenue, we can see that we are at a 9.5% net margin for the week. So not too bad. As long as I'm getting close to 10% or above 10%, I'm always happy with that. All right, with all the numbers out of the way for this week, we're going to go ahead and get into what I was actually working on and how I was able to get the ball rolling for the start of February. So if you guys watch any of the last week's episode, you'll know that I had a lot of different tasks that I wanted to get started on immediately, right when February came. So the first one was going to be getting a video editor hired to help me make videos just like you see here on screen. I did successfully get an editor hired. It took about 4 to 5 days. Found a really good candidate. I think she was going to be a good fit for the role. Definitely somebody that I want to stay long term, so I decided to take a chance on her. Next thing I also did was I created all of the manual sourcing looms I needed to do for my sourcing VA. So the purpose of these videos was basically to pass down my knowledge over sites that I'm actively looking at every day and give my VA the exact sales that work for what products for those websites. So this is going to build him a lot more leverage now because he knows how to take on regular storefront stalking, he knows how to brand search, and now he can manual source as well, which what that's going to do is give him a leverage pipeline that I use when I'm actually sourcing. So I always like to set my day up with the highest leverage task. So that's going to be like replens or manual sourcing, because all I have to do is literally just find a sale that I already know I've hit 20 times already. Next thing is I'll brand search sort of in congruence with manual sourcing, because there might be a brand direct website that you're looking at, and then it just makes more sense to obviously brand search through KPF and then find all the products that work on that certain sale. And then finally, once he's finished with that, he would just do normal storefront stalking to go out and find new leads, basically getting our foot in the door with either new brands, new sales, just new opportunities in general. The third thing that I was working on this week was sourcing myself. So again, using that leverage pipeline to help push spend when the team needed it. I'm still very much involved in the sourcing process, but it's definitely not something I have to do as long, simply because I have so much leverage built up because I've been doing this for a couple years now. And obviously having a team behind me that can do all the back end stuff and the front end sourcing for me enables me to never have to really storefront stock ever again. So I'm just cherry picking leads that I deem is going to be the best push for the business. So stuff that's really going to push the needle the furthest that we can get it to go, so that it requires minimal time effort on my end, but also a lot of spending with our capital. But I won't lie, sourcing this week was sort of difficult. Again, I anticipated February to be a slower month. So there was times this week where I had a restock that was ready to go, and I'm like, you know what? It's 8 to 9% margin, but I'm just going to spend the money because it's like $1,000 to $2,000 in spend. And my overall thought process behind taking lower margin is just that because I track my profits so consistently, even though these are projections, it gives you a good idea of exactly where the business is going to be at in a month. So if I see this week that our margin was 11, 12%, that's a incentive to me to be like, hey, we need to source higher margin this week, regardless of how difficult it is to push spend across the board. So that's just the way I think about not forcing spend, but just being tactical with it, because spend is also still a very big part of your business. And I actually made an email about this in my newsletter, why revenue vanity does actually matter. And it just digs into the principles of how your overhead is fixed. And if you don't spend enough money, then you're actually going to make less money and less margin. And finally, the last thing I did this week was some software bugs, fixes, and tweaks. So besides any minor bug fixes that my team had found just throughout using it, what I did was I implemented a new system that basically creates an API from our Gmail that we use to place orders and track all of our products. And I integrated it into our dashboard with its own inbox section. And within that inbox, it has filtered tabs. So for example, one of the filtered tabs would be like a confirmation button, shipped, canceled, and then other. And based on the context of that email, the API and sort of the AI that I built my software through can detect what kind of email goes into what specific tab, filtering it out for me so that my team doesn't have to do that. And this isn't necessarily like an email filtering thing that I'm using just for the filtering. It's more so to create leverage for my admin VA who updates all of our order statuses. So if you're unfamiliar, the way I like to do my tracking of orders to make sure that nothing goes wrong per order is we update status. So we have variations of status, like if we just placed an order, if it ships, if it gets canceled, if it's partially shipped, any sequence that you could think of that's going to be a follow-up after the original order confirmation, there is a status update that goes into that sequence. So my overall goal with this is for the software to now be able to determine if we have a confirmation email that gets sent because we just placed an order. And then let's say that that same order now ships a day later. What it should be able to do is basically remove the original confirmation email from our confirmations tab and only have the shipped email in the ship tab. So then my VA can go in, read this inbox and see that if there's something shipped there that she hasn't updated back in our inventory, she can go ahead and do that. And she doesn't have to look through every single order every single day to make sure that we're staying on top of our updates. So I know that was kind of a mouthful, but it's just something that's going to help build leverage because I've tried doing this through AI tools like Claude Cowork. And unfortunately, it's just very hard for it past filtering to actually determine how to physically update a button from order placed to shipped or order placed to canceled. So since we're still going to need a human to operate this part, I did just want to build some system of like an inbox checker to where it at least tells her exactly what needs updated and exactly why it needs updated. And besides that, something that was a little hard for me this week was really not any systemizing or just getting the ball rolling on all of the goals I had set for January. It was more so just spending money. As I talked about earlier, spending money was a little lackluster this week due to there not being a lot of opportunity. There's always opportunity, but sometimes it's just more abundant than others. And this was one of those times where it was less abundant. So it forced me to tap into lower margin buys and, really look for the highest leverage things that I could be doing because I also don't want to be sourcing all day anymore. I'm in the position where it's actually better for me to spend my time maybe making content or sourcing higher leverage products or making training videos for my VAs, building out the software, things like that. Like there's no point for me to just be hustling for an extra buck anymore. Definitely to get where we got to go this year, it's going to be part of it, but not for the whole day. So to give you guys some insight on what I'm going to be working on for next week, I can go ahead and discuss this right here. So the first thing is I plan to take 2 calls with my sourcing VA, basically going over all the manual training modules I had laid out. He's already gone through and watched them himself, but now it's going to be time to actually implement and start passing down that torch to him. So the first call I plan to take is just going to be more of a general outline of what are all these websites doing? What are we looking for from each one? Getting him set up on their email newsletters, making it to where he understands the actual process, and then also getting him to be able to go out and find other stores and other brands and other suppliers, more importantly, that he can find their own sales and then trace back to products. So just teaching him the fundamentals of manual sourcing is going to be the first call we take, probably on like Tuesday or Wednesday. And then the second call we're going to take is over a couple of specific suppliers that are a lot harder to manually source and don't use as much general rule of thumb. So this is going to be those more niche suppliers that have a ton of leverage once you know how to hit them, but you actually need to have the knowledge and expertise and more so the training and guidance on how to actually make him work so that he's not spending a bunch of time just doing nothing. Next thing I'd like to do is just with extra free time, continue to optimize the software and build the API for that inbox. Again, sounds like a really cool function and I think it's very feasible. So I just was kind of playing around with it this past week when I had time. So the plan is going to remain the same there. Definitely getting my spend up for this week. So again, I wasn't very happy about how this previous week had gone, I guess you could say, but sometimes you can't force the market and you just got to let it come to you. Obviously do what you can, but definitely am shooting for more spend this week. And then finally, because 2025 has come to an end, it's about time I started getting my books in order. So I have a meeting with a tax guy this week. I was actually referred to him through the guy who does my bookkeeping, and he was already telling me that I could save a potential $10K in taxes if I switch for a late filing to an S Corp. This is all allegedly because I still need to take the meeting, but I'm definitely looking forward to seeing how I can get some savings and actually go with somebody this year who knows about Amazon and who knows e-commerce taxes and overall more about business taxes than a generic place that I went to last year. So the overall theme for next week is really just moving the needle further with spending money, taking extra time, building systems out of it, and just keep the ball rolling. And with all that out of the way, that pretty much covers up episode 6. If you guys did enjoy this video, definitely leave a like on it. And if you haven't subscribed to that newsletter, again, feel free to do so. I dropped so much game in there that the last email I sent about the VA hiring could literally save you hours of bad VAs. So highly recommend you check it out. And that's going to be all from me for now. So peace out.